Morning, ladies and gentlemen, to this session from the gateway to the front door, how to improve the hinterland supply chains. My name is Ali Hassan. I have the pleasure of moderating this session, which will go until 12:30 sharp. That's how I've been instructed by the ITF, and we are delighted to have a wonderful panel here with us who will shed light on the current challenges that the industry is facing, each from different sectors. And it's my great pleasure to my left. She's been acting as the European coordinator for the North Sea Baltic TEN-T corridor since 2014. Previously, she was the mayor of Strasbourg, French Minister for Culture and Communications, and has also served as a member of the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Catherine Trautmann. Right next to her, I'm very delighted to welcome here on stage the director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE. She's in charge of Sustainable Transport Division there since 2007, and she brings with us over 20 years experience in trade and transport facilitation. A lot of input she can and will bring to the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, Eva Molnar. Eva Molnar is here with us. I'm delighted to welcome the two gentlemen here with us, starting with the Secretary General of the Global Shippers Forum. He will tell you in more detail about what the forum does, what the work entails. We're delighted to have him. Chris Welch. Chris Welch is with us this morning. Welcome. And last but not least, he is the CEO of B Logistics, one of the largest private rail operators in Europe. Again, a very European-dominated panel, so to speak, but I'm sure we'll spurs it out throughout the Q&A session. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gert Pauwels. Gert Pauwels is with us. From the gateway to the front door, the logistical chain, Catherine, let's start out right away. And for those in the audience, I said this is a panel made up primarily of European actors here. Some of them might not know in the audience what the North Sea Baltic TEN-T corridor is and what it does. Perhaps you can shed some light.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Ali, because I know you are very efficient as a moderator, and we are very glad to work with you this morning. So we are perhaps European, but we think globally. And the question is today how to organize the efficiency of our total network in Europe to give more capacity for companies to have some gains of profitability. Transport and energy are two critical questions, and we are organized on the territory with the different modes, but with two levels. One is the core network, which has the priority. It is the spin of the network through roads, rail, inland waterways, and also airports and ports. So this is the connection from a point to another point. In the North Sea, it is from Rotterdam to Helsinki, as an example. The comprehensive network is the rest of the network through the different modes. We have a timetable. The timetable is to finish, to organize the core network with 9 corridors, 9 territorial corridors and 2 transversal for the sea, and for the signalization system for rail. We have to finish for 2030. And for the comprehensive network, it's to finish in the 2050. So we have timetable. Then, for the efficiency of the corridor and network system, it is also money, which is essential. So with the money came with the priority. And the money came especially for the corridors with 2 programs. First, what we call the CEF, that is the contribution through subventions, but also a system with new financial tools through the EIB, which is present in this conference, and we can mix the different systems to give a correct financial support. So what is important in the corridors, in my experience, it is to give continuity. We have a reflection and organization from the end point or the beginning point, all our ports, so we are connected to the global market and to the global transport. And our issues is to give the better solutions in nodes, that is in urban areas, in which we must think in platform of services, because we are concerned by congestion of traffic and noise, environmental questions, and also density of population. So urban nodes are traffic and intermodal nodes. It's one of the crucial points. One of the other point is the interoperability. And we tackle with interoperability, multimodality, and especially as coordinator cross-border. Because of course, the essential vision of the member states is to look to their own interests and not automatically to the interest of the neighbors. And my experience also as part of, cross-border region is to consider that, of course, if we are in competition, for example, in inland ports, between inland ports, we need also to have cooperation. That is co-petition. We are in a competition, really, in the market, but we have complementarity, we have chances, we have capacities, and we have a very, very good experience between 9 ports in the Rhine Valley to organize our analysis of our situation and to see really what we are doing first in priority in the 10 years now. So it's, for example, a decision about a signalization system and gestion of traffic. So this is very important because we can connect with the maritime ports through this type of new services, taking the experience of maritime ports and transpose it in the inland ports. So this is a very concrete example. Cross-border is a very big issue because sometimes it's also strategic. For example, in the North Sea Baltic, it's the balance between the North Sea with the big ones, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Antwerp, which are the most important ports in Europe, but also the Baltic ports, which are immediately concerned by, a difference of traffic through Russia because of the situation, the sanctions situation. So we have now many questions. One is the mega ships, because megaships are very important. If we see ships from 18,000 TEU, we see that it's a train of 108 kilometers long and a road full of heavy goods vehicles from Paris to Rotterdam. So you imagine the size of the problems we have when we want to connect this big ship services to welcome them, but to have also the capacity to absorb. So this is a problem for road, for rail in the moment in different parts of the TEN-T network, and we are concerned by this. To finish, a coordinator is a facilitator. My job is not to have an administration. I have just an advisor, she's present here, Vera Kisla, and we work lightly, that is with a phone and an iPad. And we are mobile. It's about mobility and connectivity. And we try to find solutions when there are, problems of trust between member states, technical problems for the interoperability, and to organize also, the planning and the coherence of the corridors. So this is our job.
Thank you so much for these initial statements, dear Catherine. And before I move on, I just want to jump in, of course, because you mentioned the impact of megaships and the ITF. The OECD has, of course, released this report, which I believe is accessible here physically and also online, I believe. Online, online, I've been told. Yes, safe paper, that's good. Online, the impact of megaships. Thank you so much. Eva, when Catherine talked about cooperation and cross-border cooperation, you seem to be right in your element. This is obviously, as the director of the UNECE, this is sort of your bread and butter. Perhaps for those in the audience who are not too familiar with the UN Economic Commission for Europe, and particularly its focus on sustainable transport division, perhaps you can highlight a little bit, shed light on what the organization, the body, is doing.
Yes, absolutely true. You said that we are very much European here, but the UNECE is a regional commission for Europe, Central Asia, North America, plus including Israel. However, in transport, we are servicing or hosting three major bodies that have a global mandate. One of them is the Inland Transport Committee, that is the custodian of the UN Transport Conventions. 60% of contracting parties are not from Europe, so it means that it's a very global activity with global conventions. We are servicing also a committee which belongs directly and reports directly to ECOSOC, that is on the transport of dangerous goods. And lately we have been asked to host the Secretariat of the UN Secretary General Special Envoy on Road Safety. So yes, we do global and regional work on a regional platform, but we are reaching out massively. The 20 working parties under the Inland Transport Committee include, for example, a working party that might be very well known in the audience, that is the World Forum for Vehicle Regulations. A global industry like the automotive industry needs global regulations for the vehicles. Where we have members in the working party from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, etc., etc. Lately, for example, Japan joined, Japan is a party of the World Forum, but Japan joined another working party which deals with road safety. And actually technology is bringing a new institutional change around that you cannot address road safety without taking into account technology and vehicle technologies. So countries like Japan, automotive industry is very strong. They wish to be around the table when transport policy issues are being decided. And so I would like to underline that countries start to act really globally as well. The very first UN General Assembly resolution which deals with connectivity is initiated by Turkmenistan. I think they managed to have the highest support from governments and ministers in this area. So the very first, and then soon after, a second connectivity resolution was passed, again initiated by Turkmenistan and many countries, G77 countries particularly, but the European countries supporting it as well. So as a result, now the first global high-level conference on sustainable mobility, which is going to be convened by the Secretary General of the UN, is going to take place in Ashgabat in Turkmenistan towards the end of the year. So yes, we do both local, regional, and global activities together. You cannot separate.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your input as well, for shedding some light on your daily work and on the upcoming conference in Turkmenistan, which we will keep an eye on. I will, of course, come back to you with more questions, but want to bring in Chris here at this point. Chris, you, of course, are the Secretary General of the Global Shippers Forum, and the topic that Catherine has been touched upon about, megaships and so on and so forth is, of course, rings very much a tune. Tell us a little bit about the Global Shippers Forum, perhaps its history. When was it founded and why?
Yeah, it was founded in 2011. Incorporated.
Is the microphone working? Just it's not working.
You need to put it so.
Is it working now?
It's working now.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was formally incorporated and established in 2011, and largely because shippers' organisations around the world didn't have one single NGO that they could tackle the key international issues with. So, although we incorporated in the UK and we're based, our headquarters is based in the UK, like the other speakers, we are genuinely global. Our membership is over 30 countries with national shippers organisations in Europe, North America, Australasia, South America, and Africa. So you know, we're looking at this issue not just from a European perspective, but a global perspective. And our interests are to represent industry as users of freight transport services, mainly with the UN international organizations. So some of the issues that we've recently been involved in, for example, with UNECE, with IMO and the ILO, has been on the revision of the CTU code. And in fact, I chaired the joint industry government working group on that. So, you know, and we're multimodal, so we're involved in all modes of transport. So it is deep sea shipping, aviation, international trade procedures. So it's all those UN-based organisations that, you know, put the glue together that make international trade sort of possible. So you know, I think that a big thanks really to ITF, I think, for setting up this particular session, because I think that this issue of how we can improve the performance of the supply chain and the impacts of that final mile delivery and the hinterland supply chain connection is becoming increasingly a challenge for all sorts of reasons. But I think that it's already been touched upon, the introduction of the mega vessels, the big 15,000 and upwards, 18,000 plus TEU vessels, may make all sorts of economic sense to the shipping lines that have gone down this route. But that has placed a huge strain on transport infrastructure, ports, and the hinterland connections, not just in Europe, but in North America, in other Asia and other parts of the world. So this is a crucial issue for all the major stakeholders in the supply chain, and that's obviously the shippers that need to get their goods to final customers, and their cargo, essentially the cargo owners. Clearly the ports and port terminal operators, road and rail operators, and crucially governments and local authorities that are often placed with dealing with this. And again, I think well done to ITF for producing this very excellent and well-researched Megaships document, because I think it raises some really quite important points about the knock-on effects of mega vessels and how we can manage this. So I think that what I want to explore in this discussion is some of those issues relating to mega vessels. So what are the impacts of consolidation in the liner shipping market, the interaction with the global alliances on services and how that's changing patterns of trade, and open that up into, are there some wider issues on competition that we need to be concerned about? And I think that the one thing that we probably need to bring out in this debate is how we move forward collectively as stakeholders to try and tackle these problems, with a greater appreciation and understanding that when any one major actor in the supply chain makes a strategic decision, what the impacts on the rest of the supply chain are. And I think that we need some kind of mechanism for managing that process and getting some form of alignment of the overall objective in terms of moving international trade and solving our problems. And if megaships are here to stay, one can understand why the megaships came about, because of the onslaught of the financial crisis.
But is this going to be the optimum way in the future of moving trade? I think the jury may be still out on that issue, as the business model itself comes under greater scrutiny, not least by the operators of these vessels themselves. Then it is for me about how we can work collectively in the supply chain. But maybe if I leave it there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, for touching upon many of the challenges of the industry. I know Catherine is eager to respond and jump in at some point, as is Eva, and we will do, of course, a second round. But before we do, we're going to jump ship, so to speak, from the shipping to the rail industry. And we're glad to have Gert Pauwels with us. As I said, he's the CEO of B Logistics, one of the largest private rail operators in Europe. Now, you've heard primarily the discussion has been focusing on the shipping industry up until now. What about the railing industry? What are the commonalities here that you see, and what are the differences?
Well, I think the question we need to answer is how do we move these large volumes that come into the ports in the best way to the hinterland? That's a key question. And if you look at the various transport modes, well, the one that is most obviously the best choice is rail. I mean, if you want to carry large amounts of goods over a long distance in a regular way on a daily basis between the ports and the hinterland, you need to have a solution like rail. Compared to the other transport modes, it's just better. It is more economical in terms of cost per ton transported. It is more ecological, and it's more safe and reliable. So all of these elements are there. The question is then, how come it only has 10 to 15% market share in Europe? Huh? And I think there's basically two answers to that, I would say. One is, I think what everyone is trying to do is influence the infrastructure, is trying to influence regulation on to make sure that the conditions are there for the rail operators to improve the service, because it is quite dispersed, the infrastructure, there's various security systems and so on. But there's a second reason which I think is much more important, and that's because we rail operators were just not efficient the last 20 years or so. We have been focused on our own internal problems. We've been struggling with political, with syndical, with all kinds of forces that should not have been there. And we were not focused on the market. And I think that counts for about every single large incumbent operator in Europe. It also did for our company. And so we struggled to survive, we struggled to get out of there, and I think what's now happening is that, I mean, at least for our company, but also for a couple of other examples, we're now moving into the market, and we're trying to do what is really good to put these goods on rail, right? So what is really necessary. And I think there's 4 elements that are key in this. The first element is we should not just have a system in place, we should actively come with a product in the market connecting the port and the hinterland. For example, between the ports you mentioned, Antwerp or Rotterdam, have a connection with, for example, Leipzig. Make sure that there's let's say, a 3 or 5 times a week connection between those 2 ports. Put it in place. Don't wait for someone to come, actively put it in place. And bundle all the goods that you can on this product, because that's basically what rail does well, large volumes, so you need to collect large volumes. Not just containers, but also chemical goods, steel, whatever comes from in the port or around the port to this hinterland connection. The second is you need to indeed look at the supply chain. So it's not just the rail product itself, you need to make sure that there are services on both sides and along the product, like tracking and tracing, like all the other elements, and connecting via terminals, connecting with the last mile via truck or rail to the final destination. If you don't do that, you're disconnected from the industry. The third thing you need to do is you need to make sure that it's operationally excellent. If you don't do that, you're never going to get where you want. So, and rail normally should be the most reliable, but it's considered, or it has at least a reputation to be the least reliable. Now, if you do this properly, you can actually be the most reliable. And the products that we've put in place were by far the most reliable. And I just heard some examples also in the UK. There's actually, if you look at the real punctuality on certain services, you're way more reliable, also because you're least dependent on weather conditions, for example. So you can be more reliable. The last thing you need to do is you need to connect with the customer. 10 years ago, when a customer tried to contact you, he actually didn't know who to contact. He asked a question, but the other side didn't know exactly what you were looking for, and so basically after 3 weeks, you still didn't get the answer you were looking for. You should be looking to put in place a customer experience that is at least as good, if not better, than a trucking experience. And we've got plenty of examples in, for example, in B2C airlines. If you go, I mean, most people came here by plane, most likely. You look up on the website, you check the various dates. There's, you just click, you pay, you get an e-ticket, and that's how you do it. Well, that's how we want our customers to book on rail as well. If you can get to that level, you can basically shift these volumes onto rail, and by doing so, you have a solution for these large vessels, and you have a solution also for mobility in Europe, and you have a solution for, or at least a contribution to the solution for climate change.
Thank you, Gert. And I couldn't help but notice, Catherine, when Gert said that rail is really the most reliable and perhaps best form of transportation. I had a feeling you seem to disagree a bit on that, or was I wrong?
No, I think that we must not forget inland waterways. It's not because we don't have inland waterways everywhere in Europe or in other parts of the world that we must forget, because inland waterways can transport, can give the capacity for big ships also when, you know, the capacity of is given with the canalization and the level of the water. So if I see the example we have, of course it's a bit unique, but on the Rhine, we have 75% of the traffic on inland waterways in this capacity. And the capacity can increase double, for example, or more. So I think there is also a solution with inland waterways, but we must play on rail and inland waterways. And rail will come from far because of social aspect, because also of competencies and definition of competencies in the different countries. So you cannot cross, you know, sometimes it's a bit crazy, because we speak about cross-border effects, and sometimes just in the definition of competences you can have a sort of protectionism, and it's difficult. So the Dutch, for example, they gave a sort of definition which fits with everyone. So it's very easy for Dutch to come everywhere, you know, but they were global from the Middle Age. So it's a very big lesson. So in the corridors, as I spoke about, we are, as coordinators, we are those who give an animation for this connection between stakeholders, to listen to the industry, because of course when I discuss with CEOs, they say, I don't take the rail. Why? Because the train are not coming to the door of my factory. Okay, but you know, we must find a solution. Tracks, they can come. So first we need to have the capacity to put tracks on rail. This is one of the objectives, and this is also very important for professionals of logistic chain. And when we look the value chain from the maritime port to the end of the corridor, for example, we need to see really what are the services, what is missing, what we must do to give this efficiency. Why? Because on rail, I see that there is a level for containers, for example. If you don't have a massification, you don't find the profitability. So we need to look on terminals and organization all throughout the prior network in Europe to give the capacity for these containers terminals to be efficient economically. Second point, we have a problem with empty containers. So we need space. And the connection between maritime ports and inland ports is not just about welcoming goods, it's about the reflection, how we give added value in ports, and not just you know, crossing traffic through cities, for example, through ports. We need to find new possibilities of ameliorating the value, the economical value, and to find this organization. So I'm very, very fond of what was said before. That is the association of customers to all our new perspectives. That's why for innovation, the Commission decided to have a sort of meeting with all the professionals to discuss about these questions, innovation in energy, innovation in ITS, signalization systems, innovation in organization and governance, and especially in rail.
Thank you, Chris. I know you've been eager to jump in here, responding directly perhaps to what you've heard.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another flavour to it, and that is that understanding what's happening to the supply chain, the international supply chain, because with the mega vessels, the big vessels that we're now getting, it's done a number of things. One is that it's extended the supply chain by approximately a week for example, European and American importers taking goods from Asia into Europe. And that's meant that it's stretching the just-in-time manufacturing arrangements. So they've got to cope with that additional lead time. And secondly, the sheer volume of containers now hitting our major ports has led to significant congestion imports. So the problem around the world is literally getting the containers out of the port terminal. And then they're confronted with the problem of actually moving it inland, either by rail, road, inland water, or transshipment services, short sea transshipment services. And that can add further delay for example, retailers that need to get goods onto shelves, that kind of thing. And that's what I meant earlier about trying to try and organise this supply chain in a different way, with the actors working more in concert with each other. And my point earlier about when one major actor in the supply chain changes a huge dynamic, like vastly increasing the size of the ships, this has huge knock-on consequences for others in the supply chain. And where we stand today is that it's not just a question of, rail is best. Ideally, we do want to optimize rail, but we need road, and even with rail movements, the final mile bit is usually done by road, and that's why we need to collaborate across the chain. And so we need solutions to this. And one of the wider problems is that because of the sheer volume of cargo that does arrive in bunches, you get the bunching of the vessels. It's actually having the inland transport services available as well to move it. So, for example, in the United States of America, there's been huge delays where cargo owners, shippers there talk about suffering delay costs and congestion costs of approximately £2 billion a day to the US economy as a result of those delays. Not all of that is attributable to the problems I've described, because in the West Coast you've all probably been aware of significant labour problems over the last year ongoing. But the other problem in the United States is simply getting hold of haulage to be able to do that. So road transport is very difficult to purchase, and the companies can't make money out of it because of the fact that it's from feast to famine almost. So you can have a lot of work to do when the vessels come in, and then for another 2 weeks there is no work available to do that. So haulage is becoming unsustainable as a result of that. So the real problem for US manufacturers and retailers is simply getting the goods to the port, getting it out of the port. So it's really important that people understand the knock-on consequences of some of these things.
Thank you, Chris, for specifying a bit more what the problem here is. One of the many challenges, one should say. Eva, I know you've been wanting to chime in here.
Actually, I thought that this old debate, which mode is more important, is behind us. Actually, we need all the modes, and we need seamless connectivity between the modes to have a really holistic approach and to be able to serve international trade. In this regard, I would like to take this step back to hinterland connections and ports. It's common sense, and we know that hinterland connections are the weakest part of the global supply chains. And still very little attention has been given to this. A couple of years ago, when we did a regional study, not a global one, what we saw that there are lots of players on the market with very different market power. And when you move, for example, from Western Europe towards Southeast Europe or towards more to the east, you will see that instead of having a competitive market, you have countries which are captive clients of some ports and railways. And what you can also see that it's not simply the port services and the prices of the ports that would determine where you are going to take your cargo when you want to import or export, but the railway prices as well. And there is a collision, of course, here between the different modes as well. So a lot needs to be analyzed, and a lot of different ways of working together, identifying infrastructure needs, what investments are needed, would be warranted. Those seem to be more successful where, for example, the port or port authority participates in the development of the hinterland connection. So we had a discussion before this panel how much we need infrastructure. We still need infrastructure, more towards the east. But there is a need for infrastructure and for constant improvement of infrastructure. It's not only adding another lane, but actually improving the throughput capacity of infrastructure. And for that, it's not enough to have only governments participating in the decision-making. It's all the market players, including the port authorities, should be around the table, and that would help. And it's happening in some parts of the world, but that would be considered as a good practice. Besides, Chris mentioned delays. Costs are incurred both because of delays in time and both because of inefficient services. And when you compare these costs, I think in the past we focused too much on the ports. So we have to step out of this ports and hinterland only, which needs to be fixed as well. We have to see the whole global supply chain network. And when you do a door-to-door time and cost comparison, then suddenly you will see that what was considered to be common sense in economics, that maritime transport beats any land transport modes, you will see, for example, across Europe and Asia, that railways can be particularly competitive, even in time and in cost. We identified 9 rail routes and 9 road routes between Europe and Asia, which are actually converging to the modern Silk Road and to all the IFI investments. So we speak about the same corridors. And many of these corridors are competitive or could be competitive, not only between themselves, but even with maritime, with the congestion at ports, provided you have a lot of facilitation measures in place. So I accept we need a lot of new infrastructure. For us, between Europe and Asia, there are 188 high-priority infrastructure investment needs in the amount of more than $200 billion. So it's there. But there are some low-hanging fruits. You need facilitation. And there are facilitation measures in place, but not fully used. One of them is for road transport, but that could be used multimodal. We speak about its use as a multimodal, and that is the TIR. This is the only global customs transit facilitation system in the world. It functions well. We hope that soon some other countries like China will join. The US is a member, is a contracting party already. So if it starts to be used in multimodal, then there will be a lot of increase of the throughput capacity even of ports, because you don't have to do certain things at the port, and you don't even have to take the cargo to a dry port somewhere in the hinterland, because you just do it. So there is a huge potential with the TIR. but it needs to become digital. So new technologies will have to be brought into it. Then, railways. Well, the railways have a big competitiveness issue because they don't have a level playing field with the other modes, simply because the railways and the railway companies and railway organizations were not able to agree among themselves on a unified contractual relationship between the shipper and the railway company. In the road sector, this agreement has been reached many years ago, decades ago. In the railway, we have tremendous lot of different contractual relationships, and countries that are not belonging to one or the other regional legal provision, then they have their own national solution. So between Europe and Asia, you don't have the same contract and you don't have the same liability system for the loss of cargo, for the damage of cargo, for the timely delivery, etc. So this needs to be fixed. I am happy that by now there is a new convention in preparation which has been agreed on the substance, but governments still need to agree politically. Yes, agree on the management of and implementation of the convention. But these things are needed. Facilitation can save a lot of time. Facilitation can save a lot of dime as well.
Gert, I want to give you a chance here to respond to what you just heard.
No, look, I've heard two big points. One is it's not just about rail. It also links up with truck and with alternatives like short sea and inland waterways. I couldn't agree more. I think, one of the services I spoke about end-to-end are rail or are truck or truck delivery to the connection if there's no rail connection, for example, or indeed an inland waterways connection. So that's absolutely, I fully agree with that. The second is, yes, there is a lot of need for infrastructure and there's a lot of need for harmonized regulation and a level playing field. And I'm an extreme advocate of that. When I speak to my people at home in Belgian politics or in European politics, I do so. The thing I'm going to react to is that, and I'm speaking a little bit against my own sector, but I think we also have a task for us as rail operators. We've been shouting a little bit too much at politics and at infrastructure as the problem. Not to say that it's not a problem, it is a problem. It is a key problem, in Europe at least, and between Europe and Asia. I mean, in the States it's solved because they have their own infrastructure. In many other countries it's much better. But especially in Europe, it is an issue. But if we keep only, I don't know how many potential customers are here in the room, or maybe not too many, but when I speak to seminars and I always complain about these things, we're never going to get the modal shift. And so I try to say what we as rail operators can do and are doing, regardless of all the problems of infrastructure and everything, and that we should just put in place. And with our company as well, we used to be a state-owned company. We're now private, and we don't have the unions, the politics to worry about anymore. We kick ass. We just do whatever we should supposed to be doing. And that's look at the market, look at our customers, and put products in place that our customers are looking for. And guess what? We overcome all the infrastructure problems. We overcome all the regulation problems. In a good way? No, we're struggling. So we need to keep on pushing. But we can overcome. And for some reason, we see now companies, big companies, small companies, shifting their goods now also to rail. And we're based in Antwerp, which is one of the biggest ports in Western Europe. And they see this movement happening, and they stimulate people to follow. So I think it's possible if we just stimulate ourselves enough to do whatever we're supposed to be doing. Right. And if then the infrastructure and the regulation comes on top, that's going to help everything. If there's a good level playing field, it's going to go much easier for us.
All right, thank you. Now, before I want to call on the audience to chime in, obviously there are many experts here in the audience as well. I do want to touch upon the theme of this year's ITF, green and inclusive transport. Perhaps we can do a quick round on that, Catherine, because green, of course, is the thing that the tendency that one is moving towards. We just had a panel called "The Future of the Car," and of course, this particular topic that we're discussing here today is not exempt from that. So perhaps you can touch upon the green aspect of the challenges here.
Yes, the green aspect is of course linked to new energy. One of our challenge for ships is how we can use natural gas, for example, and have the deployment of the refueling stations in the seaports, but also in inland ports. We have also this issue of digitalization, because digitalization can give also some solutions. If we are less on the road and less time on the road with heavy fuels, we have a gain to diminish the pollution. But the pollution is also a question in urban areas. And we see that one of the key issues for the population to accept that there are, multimodal platforms for the different modes of transport is to to give solution to congestion, to the reduction of air pollution, and also the question of noise. So this is really what we can show with rail, with inland waterways and the model shift from road to these cleaner systems in the hinterland transport is really the combination. After that, we will have also some solutions for tracks, better solutions. So there is also a research on these capacities, like electricity, like hydrogen, like different possibilities. So this is part of the work we can do from this approach of the corridors. Why? Because if we have a long distance, capacity to organize the deployment of new solutions, first, it's less expensive. Second, it goes quickly. It's more efficient. And you have a level of implementation which is good and gives the economically sustainability, because we need also to show that new solutions can be sustainable. For ship owners, for example, we have strong discussions today if they want to change their ships or not in the Baltic Sea. Some of them, they made the analysis of prices, cost of investments, and the prices, and then the results. And one of these professionals said to me, this is really a gain. If we change, we don't lose time, we have a better time. We have the capacity to have efficient ships. This is not a problem, but we diminish the carbon print for a very, very important percentage, and then the result is positive. So I think that we need to have always this economical analysis for each decision we have. And this was the problem of rail, because this was not integrated in their views, It was a longer time. Why? Because it was monopolistic companies and also linked to states. So there is a sort of eternity for rail, which is not the case for ships or other modes like trucks, for example. So I think now the good news is that every mode and the logistic professionals and transport professionals companies, they look with the same ambition for all modes. So this is very different. So in corridors, as we are doing, we try to combine all these capacities and to show new ways with a combining vision for all modes. And I think this is very different from the past and gives more chance to succeed for sustainability.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that. Eva.
Yes, first of all, I would like to underline that green doesn't equal sustainable. Sustainable includes access, connectivity at affordable costs in a safe way, in a secure way as well, plus environmentally friendly way. Now, concerning green, which is more the environmental aspect, let's take the example of CO2 emissions from inland modes of transport. Since in hinterland, we speak about inland mode. We did a calculation using our model, which is called for future inland transport systems, and we found that the middle-income countries in UNECE region will increase their CO2 emissions from now till 2040 by more than 3.5 times, coming from freight. Interestingly, it's not coming from passenger mobility. In passenger mobility, there will be an increase of CO2 emissions, but the big CO2 emitter will be freight and in middle-income countries. So there is a lot to be done here. So when you look at the whole world, you will see that actually the only region in the world is the UNECE countries, that is thanks to the more developed countries in Western Europe and North America, but first of all, Western Europe. So the only region in the world that was able to decouple economic development from CO2 emissions is this region. But this region accounts for 50% of CO2 emitted by inland transport. So again, it's not enough what we have achieved. However, new solutions we are so enthusiastically embracing, we all, create new problems. And these new problems have to be addressed. Alternative fuels, different fuels. Governments worked several years on looking at different safety issues with alternative fuels, whether you can carry dangerous goods in inland waterways if you use LPGs. And under what conditions? What other technological changes are needed to minimize the safety and security hazard?
Thank you, Eva, for sort of broadening the perspective on what it means to be green and what costs are sort of come with it and are applied with it, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, the shippers in particular, but the wider supply chain are doing quite a lot of work in trying to reduce their carbon footprint, and there are various initiatives going on, and I've been working with some of the largest branded shippers around the world that are really serious about reporting their carbon, reducing it, and looking at the way they organise their supply chains and so on. But I think Eva hit the nail on the head when she talked about sustainability, and I think that what industry is looking for is long-term sustainable methods by which they can organise their supply chains. And the reality at the moment is that there's a lot of inefficiency already tied up in the international supply chain, and unfortunately the megaships is not the sole reason for that and the sole problem for it, but it's exacerbated it, and we need some solutions to that problem. And so there's a lot we can do in improving the efficiency of supply chain. The fact that we've extended the supply chain quite considerably, the fact that we are getting huge delays around the world, and a lack of infrastructure investment in the right places. And again, I think the important thing Eva said, there are some excellent government case studies in terms of how they're looking at forecasting trends in this area. But it will be a mix of the investment that's needed, but also how we can fix the supply chain and do it better. And the reason for me being here, I think, today is to look how we can work with whether it's the European Commission, UNECE and others, in terms of formulating this in a way that we can look at this supply chain problem and coming up with solutions that we can give. So that I believe is the only way we're going to tackle this problem. And you're right, investment is not going to be the only solution to this, because if one looks at just building a new port or building new facilities, the environmental challenges of that in itself, are huge, and will take, certainly in Europe, in other developed countries, will probably take you 10 years before you even got agreement to do it. So we do need other solutions, and we need them now.
Gert, you want to close out this round?
Yeah, you're probably anticipating my answer. If you're talking about green, well, I should just repeat that rail is by far the greenest one. If we're running mostly electric locomotives, you're 10 times, you're emitting 10 times less CO2 than a truck. and apologize there also versus inland waterways, we're doing a lot better, but still they're better than trucks. We've saved last year 1 million ton CO2 emission thanks to the fact that we did transport by rail and not by truck. And we intend to double this in a couple of years. So this is by far the greenest and the best mode to transport. The inclusive and to the other problems we've been speaking about, I think part of the solution there is innovation. I think we need to, and in all its forms, I would say, if you want to make it sustainable, we need to do it drastically different. And there are ways of doing it drastically different today, and with the people already around the table with our customers, they're willing to look for creative solutions together to do it differently. And not just, innovation in let's say, that kind of business model, also innovation in terms of use of new technology. For example, with transport, it's so easy to use a lot of the new technology is mobile. If you just connect sensors to wagons or to goods, whatever, you can follow up the supply chain worldwide. It's actually really useful to see all the movements. And by using this and also using some big data analysis, there's ways to optimize supply chains, and not just at global level, but also specific supply chains of companies. And so also by sharing these data between the various players, you can move ahead a lot faster. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build up networks also with some of the big shippers to see what are they transporting from where to where. And then, you find out that there's a lot of useless transport or going on, then by offering creative solutions to this, you can just avoid lots of trucks, lots of also warehousing, and have a direct connection. So there's a lot possible through innovation, I would say.
Thank you. It's very clear that we could spend much more time on this topic, on this aspect, green in particular, and inclusive transport. But I would like to bring you in at this point. I would like to bring in the audience, because clearly you are some of the aspects and challenges that have been addressed here certainly pertain to you as well. We have a microphone here, right? We have a microphone too, actually. Start with the gentleman in the back, and perhaps you'd be so kind to introduce yourself quickly.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Menno Manist, Panthea, the Netherlands, proud member of the team of Ms. Troutman and Ms. Kiesler. I think I've got a question for you, Chris. I'm not entirely certain. We are currently heavily involved in a project for the Port of Rotterdam, how to green the supply chain, the entire supply chain. One of the key elements in that is the port choice, because that determines the possibilities for the hinterland connections. And I don't hear anything yet about shipping lines. From what we've heard, they decide. End of story. So how can you change that? How can you affect that, influence it? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm actually glad you raised it, because one of the changes that I'm seeing in behaviour as a result of the problems that shippers are experiencing with their supply chain is they're taking a much keener interest in the terminal or the port that they're using. So they're also selecting their carriers based upon, to the extent they can. There's obviously a big restriction of choice that they've now got in ocean carrier as a result of the megaships and the alliances. But they are reaching out to the terminal operator to look at how they can improve the flow through the terminal. And that's all to do with how green and efficient as well the port is. And actually I see, coming from the other direction as well, I see terminal operators now turning more towards the customer, the end user. How can we help you? How can we help you move your goods more efficiently through the port? Are there priorities? Some of the big volume retailers on one vessel can have 700, 800 containers just on one ship. Not all of that cargo is urgent, so it's getting hold of the urgent stuff and getting it through the system. So that dynamic is definitely changing, and it's almost going back to the beginning when, in the early days of ports, the natural port customer was the shipper rather than the shipping line. It's never going to go fully back that way, but I can definitely see it happening. Interestingly, in preparing for this presentation, I had two big shippers, one in the United States and one in Europe, that specifically made that point now, that they are definitely looking more at which terminal port am I going to be using.
All right, we have this gentleman here in the second row, and then we go. Go ahead, please. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Steve Phillips, Conference of European Directors of Roads. Okay, by introducing myself, I guess you know which side of the fence I sit in terms of modes, but contrary to what you may think, road directors are very multimodal in terms of their outlook, because of course we would like to see more freight carried on other modes, because it would reduce the impact on our roads. Indeed, I can think of one road authority which already is working very, very closely to promote modal shift, not because they've been told to by the government, but just because they're thinking like an electricity company. You know, electricity companies, now they hand out light bulbs, because if they hand out light bulbs, they don't have to build another power station. Again, if we can promote modal shift, we don't have to build another lane on the motorway. So it's very, very concrete that we should be promoting multimodality. Having said that, and I really welcome the comments of Eva, and certainly with the comments where we talked about the difference between green and sustainable, and I would even refer to the panel which talks about inclusive, because I think we're missing something very, very important in this, and I'm sorry for the gentleman there, but the greenest mode of transport is actually walking and cycling. I think we can all agree with that, can't we? But then we recognise, but it's not a practical source of transport in all conditions. And if we're talking about inclusivity, I really think we have to get away from this debate about saying rail is greener, inland waterways are greener, roads are bad, because it really depends on the situation. I think we can all look at many corridors where inland waterways are the greenest, and we work very, very closely with some of the major ports. We work with our railway colleagues. Again, there are areas where the railways are very cost-effective, very efficient. What's missing in many of these statistics, and I'm sorry to say, is in the railway sector there is this misnomer where they measure their efficiency in terms of from one railway station to another. We're talking about door-to-door delivery here, and I can assure you that when you're just talking about hub-to-hub for trucks, they are much, much more efficient than the 10 times that you talk about. So please, let's talk about the whole chain. In terms of inclusiveness, again, we're talking about different corridors. And what I really would not like to see, and you can all look at the political situation in Europe at the moment, you know, do we really want to see depopulation of huge parts of Europe and huge parts of the world because they're on the wrong transport link? We have to be providing transport which is appropriate for the population, so they don't all have to move and live in some mega cities. So that's my comment, and I'd like the panel to respond to some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there is a lack of willingness to respond here on this part of the panel to what you just said. So Eva, why don't you kick us off?
Actually, you are absolutely true on everything except for walking and cycling. I'm so sorry. But I read a Financial Times article which showed, they calculated that the amount of CO2 emitted by a cyclist is far more than the CO2 emitted by a public transport passenger. So we can go into details about it, but yes. However, the main point I would like to come back to is the door-to-door. We have to have a fundamental paradigm shift even in our analysis. Often we compare costs and time between ports, FOB prices. But if you look at door-to-door, and we did a calculation for the Europe-Asia traffic, what we saw that 80% of the costs incur on 20% of the route. So there are pockets where you are losing time and money, and those pockets need to be addressed. And not only because of missing links in infrastructure, that's part of the problem, but because of border crossing issues and because of other lack of facilitation. And so on the multimodal and innovations, Well, I am personally, absolutely convinced that it should be multimodal, and all modes, and even new modes, have a role in the supply chain, all of them. But innovations actually can challenge railways if railways don't innovate enough and they don't create trains which are going to be like an air cleaner wherever they go, because there could be totally new innovations. But if road innovations are faster because there is all this political pressure on improve your emissions, improve your safety, etc. If they are faster, then railways could become in trouble because the efficiency and the cost of building railways is not comparable with roads. So while I say we need it all in an intermodal connected way, well, I would like to see much more innovations in the railways. And one little example on that. A couple of years ago, when we looked at the level crossing safety, and I asked a couple of railway companies, now, we have ITS in roads and crash avoidance technologies and all these things. Do you have something in level crossing? And the answer was, no way. Well, by the time we finished this movie we were producing, there were some innovations. But the first reaction was, no, it's actually the problem if there is a crash between a train and a road vehicle is because the road vehicle driver doesn't pay attention. Yes, we are human, we don't always pay attention.
I just want to add that, and I hope it was clear from what I was saying before, that shippers are concerned about the end-to-end performance of the supply chain, and they're largely mode blind as well. They will look to do it in the most cost-effective way, using the full range of opportunities that are open to them. And by God, they need to, because of the problems I've earlier indicated. And we need to look at solutions in terms of the whole supply chain as well, and that's why I made the point earlier that one major intervention by one stakeholder, like the megaship container operators, who drastically have reduced their costs for themselves, hasn't necessarily reduced the costs for the rest of the supply chain, and particularly the user and the customer. And that's why we need a different way of collectively working together to look at how we can find solutions to that.
All right. Thank you. Perhaps we'll move on. There are three more questions I've seen already. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Toshi Osawa from World Customs Organization, because I'm from the community of the International Customs, the community. I want to ask about the cross-border movement of goods. World Customs Organization is supporting the effective customs transit operation, particularly for the landlocked countries. This is a big topic of this year, and we found that always the lack of the coordinated border management, different government agencies, is a challenging. For instance, in the some Southeast Asia countries, the different regulation on vehicles can be a big trade barriers. Of course, I found so many problems in the customs administration, but particularly I found that they did not speak each other. So that we say that the coordinated border management is important, but in practice, it's very difficult. So I would like to learn that there is some suggestion from Ms. Catherine and Ms. Eva, if possible, how to encourage the coordination among the different government agencies. And I have one more question. World Customs Organization is going to develop the transit guidelines together with the UNECE this year. So I want to know that there are suggestions from the private sector, so that I want to ask about your expectation to the customs administration from Mr. Chris and from Mr. Powell, if possible. I believe that you are so frustrating that the daily operation of the customs administration, but I really want to hear that the real voice of the private sectors to improve the customs administration operation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Coordination, international cooperation has been mentioned many times, the plea for it. How to improve it, how to enhance it. Eva and Catherine.
Well, first of all, I would like to pay tribute to WCO, because WCO is doing a lot of fantastic work in this area, and we are happy to cooperate and continue our cooperation with WCO. with trade facilitation or trade and transport or border crossing facilitation, I see one of the biggest problems is that most of the actions, which might be politically difficult, have to be done by one country, and the benefits are enjoyed by the other country or the players of the other country. So because of that, this cooperation, international cooperation, is extremely important, that everybody along the corridor are part of it. And then I don't feel that I pay and you benefit. So everybody can have some benefits. Plus, there was a World Bank project, the TTFSE, where we identified 7 key factors. And one of the 7 key factors of success for trade facilitation projects was to have some sort of an anchor, the political leadership, which can be very strong if it is coming from the outside. For Southeast Europe, it came from the EU. All the countries wanted to be a part of the EU, so they were willing to do more than otherwise they would have been able to do. The other was to have this integrated approach, because often it's not just the customs but other border agencies that create the problem. So there is a need for integrated approach, weaker regulations, etc. A third one is you need reforms. So you cannot improve international trade if you don't reform customs, if you don't reform the telecommunication sector, the finance, insurance, the transport sector. So you need to go for reforms as well. And you need to have training, and you need to have civil society that will oversee what's going to happen once the IFIs or other donors go away.
Thank you, Eva. Catherine.
Yes, I think that, of course, in Europe we are, for the TEN-T policy, we are dedicated to this more clear strategy. And I think that for an economy which was injured by the crisis, having a strategy is very important, and to be understandable and visible gives trust to the economy and to the business activities. So the coordination is one of the key for the success, and the multi-stakeholder possibility for the governance is one of the tool we can have as coordinator. As coordinator, we are free of any engagement. We must be dedicated to this task very evidently. And we have an experience and the taste to go just directly to difficulties to find solutions. So this is a very unique experience in transnational policies, to have people who are dedicated to coordination. This is not always very easy to do, I must say, because you have also still now in cross-border issues some capacities or possibilities to protect your market. Mm-hmm. And the people and the member states, even in Europe, they have some problems to be open to the neighbors. And this was the case even between France and Germany. And I'm a specialist of this question. So that's why I said to the Baltic countries, be careful, I have the patience, because I was born with the Franco-German question, you know, and it's not finished, but we are friends. So because of this, I think that transport for sustainability in the world is a way to go. If I see the discussion with China in the moment, China is very present with the different activities of transport and logistics. There are different roads, Silk roads through Europe. Every country in Europe wants to be on the Silk Road. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy for China to discuss with this country, this country, this country, and to see what is the best proposal. We have to be really very frankly open to the discussion and discuss all the topics we have on this round table, because this is the key for success for European business and for example, Chinese presence and business in Europe. So I think that our challenge in Europe is we have now the tool. We have this TEN-T policy, one of the best I think we did, because this was done through experience and a combination of more efficiency in transport and logistics, and the sustainability question. So this is really the two legs on which we go. We have the tool, we have the money, not enough, but we have. Now we need also to go through, for example, with the coordination between rail freight corridors and corridors for passengers and freight, as we have in the ordinary corridors, and go further. So we will revise our work plans. The work plans are public. I want to say this because there is no hidden strategy in Europe. This is very clear. And this is debate. The debate is still in the European Parliament. So the member states, they don't decide just at the top level of the governments. There is and there are parts of decision through the Commission and through the European Parliament. So the users, the payers, the victims of tax, they are also, able to participate to the decision. So I think that this multi-stakeholder issue with fora, we have forum in our different corridors in which ports are present, professionals are present, cities, regions are present, users are present. Everyone can participate, and we verify each part of our strategy with these partners. So partnership, collaborative way of working, having tools as coordination is some of our possibilities in the moment.
Thank you, Catherine. I think there was a two-part question which pertained to Chris and Gert. In the interest of time, may I ask you to be brief so that we can squeeze in the last two questions before the end of the session?
Yeah, I will be brief. I think I agree with much as what has previously been said about the need to find some form of integrating this between the various international organisations, because I don't think it's working effectively at the moment. So a good example is in December I was in Nairobi for the WTO trade facilitation conference, where various trade facilitation agreements were reached with developing countries in Africa. The World Customs Organization was there and other UN agencies. So you get, at that point, a lot of political high-level input into or support for that on the basis that that will propel international trade and for those developing countries. But then you get the fight back, from that, because when I then look around at the mix of security and changes to customs arrangements that seem to often go backwards rather than forward. So a good example, a practical example, is what's happening, I think, in the European Union with the new European Union Customs Code, where on the face of it is looking to harmonise things and improve things, but in practice I see a lot of the flexibility that used to be in the system driven out of the system. So the system seems to fight back, against this. For those of us in trade, I think it's a constant battle to try to make it clear what the real benefits to the supply chain are and for trade. So I'll leave it at that, because I could probably wax on for some time.
Indeed, the system fights back. Sounds like a Star Wars movie, but I like the terminology. Gert, do you want to chip in quickly?
Well, I could only agree. I think it's, I'm not sure, and I'm sorry to say so, but I'm not sure if we have in Europe the best example of how to work together between states. In railway systems, for example, we've defined one safety system for Europe. We now have, I think, about 10 versions implemented in a way that is not coordinated. So I'm not going to say how you do this or how to copy the European system as a best practice in Southeast Asia. Do it differently, might be better.
Okay. And thus the panel has been extended by another 90 minutes. No, we're going to take in the last two questions. This gentleman has been very patient, and of course in the first row. Why don't we combine the two questions and then throw it back at the audience? Please, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Marco Sorgetti, and I'm the director of FIATA. FIATA is the world-level representation of logistics providers and freight forwarders. And I mean, I just couldn't resist the topics, of course, because people upstage are people that I know pretty well. Well, let me quote Hillary Clinton. We deal with everybody in the sense that we need to deal with everybody, and this is what we have to do. I just wanted to throw in a word of, not caution, is just think about it. I mean, everybody is talking about integration of the supply chain, and everybody is thinking about integrating the supply chain and so on. So that's what we do as a business. And actually, I think that you have to reflect on the issue of core business and the issue of what service you want to actually offer. In my view, it is not very productive that everybody in the supply chain thinks about integrating the supply chain as it is happening now, as it has been happening for the last 30 years. I mean, I have been dealing with this since 1992 with the first white paper, and this has always been an ambition of railways trying to integrate the supply chain, road transport trying to integrate the supply chain, air carriers to integrate the supply chain, and even maritime carriers to integrate the supply chain. There are physical limitations, and working together is the only way. And in my view, the sooner we abandon the ambition of having ships coming ashore and trucks crossing to the USA and aircraft landing on everybody's courtyard, the sooner we'll be to the solution of finding a solution together. In my view, this is what we do as a business, and we, as I said, we deal with everybody. This is what people should let other people do. Let them specialize in their work. And, you know, carrying goods is a very complicated business. We would be very happy if the railways were pulling trains efficiently at a decent cost, and aircraft were carrying goods from A to B in a decent manner without too much fiddling with the consignments, and ships were calling at the right ports at the right time instead of once in a while, and so on and so on. And truck drivers could be sometimes more cooperative. But I mean, it's a question of cooperation. So I think this is an invitation to work more looking at your own business rather than at someone else's business, as like everybody's doing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. More cooperation. I don't think there's anyone here on this panel who would disagree with that. Quite on the contrary, this is, has been running throughout this panel here this morning. Gentlemen, you have the last question.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm from Global Times from China. Because I would like to ask, because for decades trade has been happening around the world's coastal areas, and now we are talking about inland supply chains. And I want to ask the panel, what would be the role for inland supply chains in the decade to come? Because in China, like manufacturing centers are moving inland for the cheaper cost. So what would be the role of inland supply chains in the foreseeable future?
Is there anyone in particular you would like to address it to?
No.
Yeah. Got it. Well, whoever feels that.
Yeah, yes, actually it would be another day to discuss this, but...
well, we have 2 more minutes, so...
The world is in constant motion. What worked yesterday will not work tomorrow. So because of that, I think, yes, we are moving into the heartland, and then we are going back. Some countries suffer because they are landlocked, and Central Asian countries landlocked, but they have a big advantage. They don't have the problem of increased sea level, what ports will have to address. So it's a constant motion. And in this constant motion, what Marco raised, that let's cooperate, but let's not try to control, because integration you use as a synonym to control. I fully agree, let's cooperate, but one has to bear in mind that there is a restructuring of the whole transport sector or the market area. In the past, it was transport. road operator, railways operator, regulator, etc. But today, there are the software producers, the intelligent transport system providers. A lot of information is there. So we don't have the traditional market players anymore. So yes, there is a need for cooperation, but there is always a tendency for competition to gain more profit and to control. So there is a role for regulator, and that would be my final point here, that yes, governments will have to play a much stronger role in the future than they have played in the past couple of years.
Thank you, Ivan. Let's get the final points very briefly in from all the remaining three participants, Gert, Chris, and then last word goes to Catherine.
Let me maybe react to some of the things, because I've been getting some backlash by probably being misunderstood to some point. What I was saying was basically what you were also saying. The railroads are not doing enough, and their role should be bigger. They should be much more proactive in listening to the market and doing what they should be doing. That was my key point. They should not overtake the role of the forwarder, but the forwarders are currently not using railroads because they're not doing their job well enough. There's only so many forwarders that actively are using the railroads. And so I think the rail operators should now start taking a much more leading role, much more active role in the market, because they can make the difference. The other modes are already moving ahead at the right pace. And just to respond to Mr. over there, our biggest customers are truck companies, and they would love to not invest in chassis anymore and not to recruit many truck drivers anymore, so they prefer to do traffic with us rather than to do it by truck along parts. So I think indeed the cooperation is good, but the railroad should be much more active and much more listening to the market to make the shift happening. And then if we do that, I think there is a big move ahead towards green and inclusive.
Thank you, Gert. Chris, final words?
I kind of hesitate to say this, but I again agree with Eva. I think that governments do need to get more involved, and it sounds from somebody from industry saying, you know, come along and regulate us, but it's not that, and I don't mean that. But I think that what really governments need to take some time out is to really get to understand the complexity of the international supply chain, because they don't understand the supply chain and they are making huge decisions about infrastructure and all sorts of other aspects that we've been talking today. And unless we get some real experts in government that do get behind that, then I think we're lost. But we do have to make some urgent decisions about some of the wider trends that are happening with consolidation in the industry, the concentration on smaller numbers of ports and all of those kind of things that are going to place huge strains on the international supply chain, and decisions that other actors will take in terms of where they site manufacturing and how they manage then the global distribution.
Thank you, Chris. Catherine, you get the final word.
Thank you. I think that in the moment, as I can see it, maritime ports pay a lot of attention, much more now than before, to the inland organization. And this inland organization is key also for companies to decide where they want to have their plans, for example. So this is the first remark. The second remark, the big ships are a very big challenge, because we see now in Europe, for example, some ports wanting to develop offshore ports and having new installations. But we see also that very big ports, maritime ports for the moment, cannot welcome these big ships. So there is a problem which is just physical. We spoke about sustainability, but the way we are in geography is also a constraint. And then Europe. Can I give my last, word about it? I don't say it's a model, but I say we can be enough responsible to use the tools we decided to have, because the coordination is possible. The ambition must be shown by member states, and continuity can be the result and efficiency through the mobilization of actors. So I'm not pessimistic. I think that as our roundtable could show, we see the problems, we see also the challenges and the chances we have, but we are much more open to complexity, as you said, Chris, and I think this is the solution we can find, be able to be flexible and inventive enough, creative enough to find solutions to complexity. This is why we are passionate about the subject.
Well, you clearly proved it here throughout the past 90 minutes that you are. Yes, indeed. Ending on a positive and optimistic note. That's how we like it here at the ITF. I think this has been a wonderful discussion, going in depth and highlighting the many challenges of the hinterland supply chain, as complex as it is, as Chris rightfully pointed out. In that sense, a big round of applause, and thank you to the 4 formidable panelists here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Ali, because he's very efficient. Thank you to him.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.